Hey, everybody, wish you guys all well. In this video on Spirit of the Father, today's video that I'll be recommending was made in 1998, and that is A Bug's Life. This is one of my favorites too. So I'll be all over the place with these recommendations, but again, these all, in my view, embody the Spirit of the Father, the true protagonist. And again, this is a perfect example here. Flick, who's the main character in this movie, flawed as all can be, um, but his persistence and essentially facing adversity shows to be to me this is really a gem. It's family friendly, great if you're a father looking for a movie to watch with your children. And as always, I have here a few quotes. I have a few quotes here with this one. I have about five. And the first one is it's Flick speaking with Dot right here, who is the Queen's daughter. So at the beginning, Flick is giving a rock. He's showing a rock to Dot. He goes, "Here, pretend that this is a seed." She goes, "It's a rock." He goes, "Oh, I know it's a rock. I know, but let's just pretend for a minute that it's a seed, all right? We'll just use our imaginations. Now, do you see our tree?" And he's pointing to the tree. "Everything that made that giant tree is already contained in this little tiny seed. All it needs is some time, a little bit of sunshine and rain, and voila." She goes, "This rock will be a tree." She goes, "Seed to tree. You got to work with me here, right? Now, you might not feel like you can do much now, but that's just because, well, you're not a tree yet. You just have to give yourself some time. You're still a seed." She goes, "But it's a rock." Because "I know it's a rock. Don't you think I know it's a rock when I see a rock? I've spent a lot of time around rocks." She goes, "You're weird, but I like you." And it's a really great scene. It's right off the beginning of the movie, but it's a great example. And obviously, it's comical in that scene, but it really is very powerful because what he's pointing to is something that's deeply conceptual. It's a deeper idea. I mean, this is a perfect example of if you have faith of a mustard seed, right? We need a lot of faith in our culture. Um, but she's looking at it, she goes, "Yeah, but it's a rock." And she's not seeing the bigger picture. There's so many metaphors, there's so many great examples in the Bible, but there's a lot of people who just look at it surface level. They're just looking at it that way. Uh, and it's it's not easy to, when you're seeing things from a material viewpoint, um, you're not going to see the bigger picture. So I thought that was really interesting. People will say, and this is really what separates people who are truly consciously have faith and people who are just wishful thinkers. The next one is from Hopper. Now, Hopper's not on this cover here, but Hopper is the antagonist of this movie. And with any movie, I think it's more when I was younger. You think you can only find wisdom from the protagonist, but oftentimes there's a lot of wisdom that comes from the antagonist. They wouldn't be a character if they didn't have some sense of wisdom, and the higher wisdom has to know that, right? So you have to know your enemy, and on a spiritual aspect, you have to know the dark side of yourself. You have to make friends with that. You have to love that part of yourself, because to resist that part, to fight yourself, you can be your own worst enemy. And it's important to love that lower part of ourselves as we come to understand it, because the antagonists are really just the lower self, right? And they need someone to be that example for them. Because many antagonists you'll find in your life, you can convert them, you can lead them to the good side. Not everyone, but that shouldn't be the only mission. But your mission is focusing on good and leading people to that place, but not beating yourself, like not trying to save the world. Right? Don't cast pearls to swine. Don't be a holier than thou person. Find the mission, find your purpose, and focus on that. And you'll convert a lot of people just by doing that. Um, but Hopper goes, "First rule of leadership: everything is your fault." It's really true. When you look at it from the right context, everything is your fault. And that's another way of taking responsibility. It doesn't mean everything technically is your fault, like actually, like really your fault, but it's just taking responsibility. How could I have adjusted this situation? You know, somebody, if you're a business owner or someone who owns a company, someone else makes a mistake. How is this? How can I look at myself and say, hey, you know what? This is my fault. This is my fault. I take responsibility for this. Because when you start to do things like that, I think there's tremendous power in that. Even if something's not your fault, it's like, how can I have done this? And again, there's wisdom to not get to there where it's a everything's your fault, poor me mentality. Because oftentimes with humility, as I've said, neutrality can often be apathetic, be disguised as apathy, um, meaning that many people who are thinking they're being neutral are actually apathetic. And that's the flip side of the positive aspect of it, right? Because a true leader is neutral. You know, he's not sitting there say blaming himself for everything. Poor me. Oh, what did I do wrong? But he's looking at it from a neutral perspective where he's saying, you know, where could I have become stronger in this? Right. And that's what makes a really good team is you have a collective team saying, hey, where could I have done? Taking responsibility, almost fighting to take responsibility. I could have done this better. No, I could have done this better. It's instead of saying, no, you could have done this better and then pointing fingers at each other. But I thought that was interesting as the antagonist giving that wisdom. Another one, and this is really where it gets the heart of this movie. He goes, and he's speaking to the ants. Now they're ruling the ants. Now, how many people? And now we have to recognize there are very few people who are controlling humanity. So this really hits a core. Um, he goes, "You let one ant stand up to us, and then they all might stand up. Those puny little ants outnumber us 100 to 1, and if they ever figure that out, there goes our way of life. It's not about food, it's about keeping those ants in line. That's why we're going back. Does anyone else want to stay?" And then they all line up to follow him. He's ruling through fear. And the guy goes, he's quite the motivational speaker, isn't he? And he goes, let's ride. And they all go and they go back to the ants because they're making the ants collect food for them. Um, but that's part of knowing thy enemy, you know, and it applies today. You know, when you stand up, to stand up in the truest sense, where you're not resisting, because there's plenty of people out there now who are resisting anything that pops up, anything, you know, just to be part of a club, you know, and they're fighting the power. Like that's not what I'm talking about. Right? People will look for enemies that really aren't there. What I'm saying is that to me, following that Christ-like mentality, when you follow Christ, you're facing persecution. You're going to be hated. And rather than resisting and fighting, Christ didn't have to resist. He stood for something higher and they attacked him. So there is a certain resistance, but I just say that lightly because otherwise you go out looking for a fight. And someone who in my experience where there's this where you can get stuck in the warrior mentality, you're always looking for an enemy. It's a good source of motivation. You know, it's good to be like, oh, yeah, haters good. It's like was it Roosevelt's quote? You have enemies, good. It means you stood for something in your life. It's one thing to have enemies. It's another thing to go always looking for enemies because it's not a sustaining source of energy. It's not a sustaining source of power. So the core of really Socrates' quote, um, focus all of your energy on building the new, creating new, instead of destroying the old. So later on in the movie, Hopper says to him, "Oh, actually, no. Let's focus on this. Flick. He says at one point of the movie. Now, this is a perfect example. He's screwed up. Right? He all these guys he got here. He got a whole bunch of people help him out, and they're just actors. They're not actual warriors to fight against the grasshoppers. He said he now they um he's about to be exposed. They can't know the truth. The truth you see is bad. I will be branded with this mistake for the rest of my life. My children's children will walk down the street and people will point and say, look, there goes Spawn, the Spawn of Flick the loser. If and what I love about this scene is that you know there's a part of in the movie Flick does not want to be exposed. Does not want to be exposed. And you know, if we all look within our lives, there's parts of our lives that we wouldn't want exposed. We wouldn't want that to come to the surface. And I think it's a really powerful scene because if we all look within our lives, there's everybody has that weak spot. Everyone has that part where if they were really exposed, they wouldn't look like, this knight in shining armor. It's great to look at someone on social media and you see their great life. They got pictures here, pictures there. You can get pulled into this and say, "Oh, look how great their life is. I wish I had that." It's an illusion. 9 times out of 10, it's an illusion. And in the same way, and another aspect of it is that this is really one of the cores of forgiveness. I think at least what's helped me, and I hope it helps you, is that part of forgiveness is recognizing how, you have a lot of weak spots in your life. And if you go around pointing out everybody else's weak spot, well, that's really the core. Before you point out your own, I would add that. Um, that's really the core of what Christ says, where focus on that which is within you. Take out the mote within your own eye before you go doing that within others. It was one of the things that really made me appreciate Trump. Not so much like I'm not like I think nobody should worship a person. I think it would do people a service to criticize, but not in the right way, not but in the right way. So if you have a criticism of Trump, he's surrounded by people who are going to disagree with him. But what the difference between people who are just haters and constructive criticism, and to me, an indicator of that is someone who could look at Trump. Let's say they disagree with Trump, right? Can you look at something that he's done as good? And if you're blinded, you can't say he's done anything good. To me, that reveals a lot of character. It reveals a weakness of character, because I can look at people I disagree with, or people I don't like, for example, and I can look at positive things they've done, and I think that's very important, especially when we speak politics, religion. Who are the people who get like triggered by the word Trump? Um, and how perfect are you? How much are you in the arena? And to me, that even has more powers. Rather than bashing, what are you doing to be that change you want to see? So, um, but yeah. Now let's go to the next one. Now, yeah, I just thought that was important because that's really one of the cores of forgiveness. You ain't perfect. So, when you recognize that, it forces you not to, it, it can force you to be in the arena rather than uh, hating on everybody who's in the arena, not doing it perfectly. Next scene, the last one I have here. It's one of my favorite scenes, um, where where Flick stood up. To me, this is the core of, it's a deeply Christian principle. Hopper says, "You piece of dirt." No, I'm wrong. You're lower than dirt. You're an ant. Let this be a lesson to all you ants. Ideas are very dangerous things. You are mindless, soil shoving losers put on this earth to serve us. And Flick, he's on the ground. He gets up and he just says, "You're wrong, Hopper. Ants are not meant to serve grasshoppers. I've seen these ants do great things, and year after year, they somehow manage to pick food for themselves and you. So who's the weaker species? Ants don't serve grasshoppers. It's you who need us. We're a lot stronger than you say we are, and you know it, don't you?" What am I mean, to me, this is the most powerful scene of the movie because it exposes, right, as everybody has a weakness, it exposes Hopper's weakness. And this is really the difference between love and fear. I know there's often, and I might do a video on this, but the difference is, it better to be loved or feared? And on a surface level, again, this is where you get into paradoxes, speak a lot about paradoxes. I believe it's better to be loved than feared. But on a surface level, it's better to be feared than loved. If you mean love just by emotional liking, much better to be feared. And I think, if you look at Spirit of the Father, Gandhi, he explains it perfectly. There's passivity, then there's aggression, and then there's love. True, peaceful, peaceful, um, what is it? Nonviolent resistance, essentially. So it's the way of Christ. But on the bottom is passivity. So it's better to be feared with aggression, to be the aggressor, rather than to be um, passive. So It's better in that sense. So, but when Flick stands up here, um, he is basically he's exuding courage, he's exuding humility, he's standing up for his people. And this is to me, this is one of the greatest scenes because it is the greatest scene in the movie because it also exemplifies the quote, let me pull it up here. In the beginning, the patriot is a scarce man and brave and hated and scorned. When his cause succeeds, the timid join him, for then it costs nothing to be a patriot. And that's one of the things that's really hard to follow Christ. Because when you follow him, essentially what it means, right? Again, if you're not religious, because I'm hoping to really share ideas here that when people see this, they're not like, I don't want people to join a religion, like just to join it. Like, I want you to understand what this means. So, if you're not someone who's religious, what I mean by this is you have to have courage. If you know something is right to stand up, you might be the only person to stand up. And everyone might not follow you. So in this scene is a great example. Everyone might not have followed because if you just look at Flick standing up to Hopper in this scene, um, everyone might not have followed him. Most people might they lived in fear. So when you stand up, for example, throughout time, people have stood up. You stand up, you're probably going to be alone. Accept that you're going to be alone. But accept that some people will see what you see and trust that if you're operating at the highest level, you're going to have the right people follow you. And people will see it. The right person will see it. And you'll be rewarded at the right time and in the right way. But along that path, it's painful. It's painful. So um, but in the end game, in the long game, the good wins. And paradoxically, Christ won. He won on the cross, but he won at the cost of his life. So you have to really be in a position where you're attached to a higher idea than your own life without being a victim, like looking for a fight. You know, everybody wants to say, "Oh, they beat their chest. Look at, I would die for this and I'd die for that." And again, there's too much ego there. Is pride. So it only comes from when you're living in the right frame of mind. So I hope this video finds you guys. Again, Bugs Life, check it out. Was made in 1998. Great movie, great messages, and again, embodies that spirit of the Father.